Welcome to the Untold Civil War. You know, I get asked all the time, how do I find these untold stories? Well, to give you an example, not too long ago, I was in Cold Spring Harbor, Nassau County at the Whaling Museum. Wonderful museum with some great exhibits. And while I was there, I really loved their scrimshaw collection. I loved it so much that I couldn't leave without parting the gift store with my own piece of scrimshaw. Of course, this is not real scrimshaw. It's a replica that has the same effect. And on it is engraved the Adventure Galley, Captain William Kidd, and who doesn't love pirates? But of course, when I look at that, I started to think, is there a connection to whaling and the Civil War? And sure enough, I found out that the last shots of the Civil War were fired in defense of animal rights. And so that brings us to the story of Confederate commerce raiders. When the Confederacy was formed, they didn't have a navy, they didn't have an army, they didn't have much of anything. They had to start from scratch. And they knew that the U.S. industrial machine would be one heck of a thing to fight. So to combat this, they would have to go to Britain, where they would basically find ships that they could purchase that were fast, highly maneuverable, and were able to attack what they decided was the most vulnerable and valuable target, the U.S. whaling fleet. Now, why would you attack the U.S. whaling fleet? Well, first of all, whaling was still sort of a very rich source of the national wealth for the U.S. And also, too, the whaling fleet was the major school for sailors at the time. Many sailors who were serving in the U.S. Navy cut their teeth while serving in the whaling fleet. And so, by attacking the whaling fleet, you were attacking the unofficial Annapolis, if you will. Also, too, the whaling fleet spent most of its time in the Bering Sea, which was quite distant and would allow these commerce raiders to operate without being chastised by the massive Union blockading fleet. So what ended up happening was one of these commerce raiders that was purchased by the Confederacy was originally known as the Sea King. She could travel 11.07 knots over the measured mile on auxiliary steam power, and this made her one of the fastest ships afloat. One of her first missions was taking troops to New Zealand. She was a seasoned ship, exactly what the Confederates would want. They purchased her, and they armed her with two 30-pounder Whitworths, 4 7-inch guns, 2 small 8-pounder guns, and they christened her the CSS Shenandoah on the 19th of October, 1864. Commanding the ship would be James Waddell, a 41-year-old former U.S. Navy officer, and right from the start, they would immediately start attacking whaling ships out in the Pacific. On June 28, 1865, they would actually capture no less than 9 whaling ships. At one point, a Confederate naval officer landed on the deck of one of these whaling ships, and when the captain of that ship asked him, "Why are you doing this?" he responded, "We have entered into a treaty, offensive and defensive, with the whales, and are here by special agreement to disperse their mortal enemies." Then on August 2nd, they came across the British bark, the Barracuda, and taken exactly from the CSS Shenandoah's log, they wrote, "Having received by the British bark Barracuda the sad intelligence of the overthrow of the Confederate government, all attempts to destroy the shipping of property of the United States will cease." That meant that their last venture to capture those 9 whaling ships was in fact the last battle, if you will, of the Civil War. And not only that, it was, maybe tongue-in-cheek, fought in defense of animal rights. CSS Shenandoah would then make for Liverpool and would arrive on November 6, 1865, when they would, for the last time, lower the Confederate flag. And this was the last time an active Confederate unit ever flew the Confederate ensign banner. But not all whalers served on the sea during the war. Amos Harrison started out as a green hand on the whaling ship Harrison. He must have been very excited to take part on this first venture of his as a green hand. This means that he was new to the world of whaling and the excitement of traveling through the Pacific, things he probably had never seen before in his life. One thing that he found so enchanting was the Hawaiian archipelago and the Sandwich Islands, and he always wrote about wanting to go back there. However, the hard work of whaling, the hard work of sailing, being vulnerable to the storms, the weather, took a toll on him, and after that one trip, he didn't stay on. He went back to be a landsman back on land, and he would find his wife by the name of Philinda Smith, and they would marry and have 3 beautiful children. But when the war broke out, he would enlist in 1862 and would be mustered in as a corporal in the 154th New York. He would serve quite honorably. He would suffer from what plagued many soldiers of the time. He would suffer from illness, and he would recover from that, and then he would be wounded in the chest by a spent bullet at Chancellorsville. He would survive that even. And he would eventually be promoted to sergeant. And then, of course, on July 1st, 1863, he would be there at Gettysburg on that fateful day, tasked with covering the retreat of the Union Army. He and his comrades were outnumbered 3-1, and they put up a hell of a fight. Unfortunately, Amos Harrison was found dead, clutching to his chest an ambrotype of his 3 children. It was a tragic end to this whaler. However, I like to think maybe in another world or on the other side, he did get to take his kids to the Sandwich Islands, to the Hawaiian archipelago, and spend some time on those Pacific beaches. But that is the story, at least only a snippet of the story of whaling and the Civil War. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. I hope you tune in next time for the next one. And if you can't wait that long, please, if you haven't already, listen to our podcast. We've got a lot more content on there, and there's a lot more interviews with some great experts on there. Please follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, and on here, give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this, subscribe, all that good stuff. Leave a comment. Really appreciate all the support. And of course, finally, I want to give a shout out to everyone who's supporting the show on Patreon. This is not possible without you guys. And of course, this video specifically and the show itself is also brought to you by one of our biggest sponsors, the Badge Maker. So I want to give a shout out to the Badge Maker. If you are a reenactor, if you are someone who loves history, a collector, you can look no further than the Badge Maker to improve your impression, improve your collection. He produces some of the best reproductions on the market as far as core badges, Civil War ID discs, you name it, he's got it. So please, there's going to be a link for his wares in the description, so definitely go check him out. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.